All right, let's get right into a story that feels like it's ripped from a screenplay, but it's a real case from the Federal Court of Australia. We're talking about one single document, just a piece of paper that ballooned into a multi-million-dollar fraud and a lawsuit so complex it took a judge over 800 paragraphs to explain it all.
And it all really comes down to this one question. Think about it. The seller in this story, he thought he was just doing a little favor, helping a client out. But that help? It ended up putting him on the hook for a catastrophic loss. So, how on earth does a simple favor spiral into financial ruin? Well, it happens when this is the number involved. Over $1 million. That's the size of the loan that was secured because of that small favor. All of it resting on a document that was, at its core, a complete lie. And this is the story of how that lie came crashing down. So, our story kicks off where so many business deals do, with an invoice. But this was no ordinary invoice. Nope. This was the key that unlocked a huge loan and set a very careful, very meticulous fraud into motion. So here's the official breakdown. We're in the Federal Court of Australia with a judgment handed down in 2025. The main issue here is something called accessor liability. Now, what's that? It's basically the law's way of asking, hey, maybe you didn't start the fire, but are you responsible if you're the one who knowingly handed over the gasoline? At the heart of this whole mess was a deal for 2 used abattoir chains. Simple enough, right? But when the loan defaulted and the lenders lost all their money, they didn't just sue the people who borrowed it. They went after the seller, a Mr. Watts, arguing he wasn't just some innocent guy caught in the middle. They claimed he was a co-conspirator. Okay, so how did we even get here? To really understand the scheme, you've got to meet the cast of characters in this little commercial drama. All right, so first up, we've got the buyers, Mr. and Ms. Sharp, running a company called Chopsonian. Then there's the seller, Mr. Keith Watts. In the middle, you have the group of private financiers who put up the money, and an independent valuer, a Mr. Smith, who gets dragged right into this thing. Now, this is what makes it a real story. The Sharps weren't just some villains in a boardroom. They had a dream, right? This whole paddock to plate business idea. But to make that dream a reality, they needed cash. A lot of it. Turns out, way more than the equipment they were buying was actually worth. And here it is, the heart of the fraud, plain as day. The actual, genuine price for the equipment was about $528,000. But the invoice they used to get the loan, a whopping $850,000. That's a difference of over 300 grand just invented out of thin air. The judge didn't pull any punches. He saw exactly what was going on, and he called it a dishonest and fraudulent design. This wasn't some clerical error or a misunderstanding. No, this was a deliberate plan, cooked up from the very start. And this is where it gets really juicy, because when they all got to court, 2 completely separate, totally different realities were presented. The judge had to figure out which story was real and which one was pure fiction. On one side, the lenders were saying this was a full-blown conspiracy. They claimed Mr. Watts was in on it, that he knowingly created fake documents and then helped launder the extra money. But Mr. Watts? He told a very different story. He claimed he was the victim, that he'd been duped by the Sharps, that documents were changed without him knowing, and he was just, surprised when an extra few $100,000 landed in his bank account. So the whole case really boiled down to these 4 pieces of evidence. You had the first invoice with that inflated price, then a second version that got even more creative, adding a fake $90,000 deposit that was never, ever paid. Then you've got an email from Mr. Watts himself confirming that fake deposit, and finally, a phone call that would come back to haunt him years later. Now, in a he said, she said battle, who the judge believes is everything, and the judge found the loan manager, Miss Howe, who was the key witness for the lenders, to be completely credible. He actually called her impressive, truthful, and reliable. That's a huge point for the lenders team. But when it came to the seller, Mr. Watts, wow, it was the complete opposite. The judge was brutal. He called his story a recent invention and flatly stated he had no hesitation in rejecting that evidence. In a courtroom, that is a knockout punch. So what was the evidence that sealed the deal? It all came down to a single conversation. One phone call, carefully documented, that just blew the entire defense to pieces. This is a perfect lesson in why you always get things in writing. Just look at this timeline. back in September 2016, long after this deal was supposedly done, Mr. Watts gets on the phone with the loan manager. Just 3 days later, she does something brilliant. She writes down everything that was said in that call and saves it in an email. Fast forward years to 2025, and that simple, contemporaneous email becomes the single most critical piece of evidence that decides the entire case. So what was in the email? What did he admit in that call? Oh, just everything. He confessed that Miss Sharp had explicitly asked him to inflate the invoice for one reason, so the extra money from the loan could be kicked back to her. That was it, the smoking gun. It proved he knew exactly what the fraudulent purpose was all along. And that brings us right back to this legal idea of accessorial liability. The law is pretty clear: if you are knowingly concerned in a wrongful act, you're on the hook for it too. That phone call proved Mr. Watts wasn't just some guy who got tricked. He was an active, willing participant who provided the very tools needed to commit the fraud. So, with the lie totally exposed, what was the final verdict? And maybe more importantly for all of us, what are the big lessons we can take away from this very, very expensive small favor? The judge laid it out with perfect clarity. He saw 3 distinct roles in this drama. You had the Sharps, who were the principals, the masterminds. Then you had Mr. Watts, the accessory, the guy who knowingly handed them the ammunition. And finally, you had the valuer, Mr. Smith, who was the truly innocent party, someone who did his job honestly, but whose work was twisted and misused by others. And this whole saga leaves us with some incredibly important lessons. Number 1, creating a fake document is never, ever a small favor. 2, confirm everything important in writing. That email was the loan manager's shield. 3, if money starts moving in weird ways, that is a massive red flag. Stop everything. 4, never, ever think you can outsmart a court's investigation. And finally, claiming "I didn't know" is a terrible defense when it's clear you just chose not to see what was right in front of you. At the end of the day, Mr. Watts thought he was just helping someone out. Instead, he ended up helping to pay for a multi-million-dollar fraud. It really leaves us with a sobering question to think about in our own lives and our own businesses. That harmless little favor someone asks for today, could it become your biggest liability tomorrow? And are you prepared to tell the difference?